My husband laughed loudly with his friends. "I'll be our tally, dump her after the promotion. She's just my stepping stone." I stared at him, then said, "So was your resume?" I just forwarded it to HR with a note. Their faces dropped instantly. My name is Irina. I'm 41 years old, and I live in Asheville, North Carolina. I never thought of myself as someone with a dramatic story. I worked hard, paid my bills on time, remembered my niece's birthdays, and helped my neighbors carry their groceries inside. The kind of life where nothing exciting ever really happens until one day, everything unravels all at once. I've worked for a major real estate company for over a decade. I'm a corporate training coordinator, which is a fancy way of saying I teach people how to be decent at their jobs without losing their souls to corporate nonsense. It pays well enough. I don't love it, but I don't hate it either. Most days, I wake up, drink my coffee, get through meetings, and go home to the two-story colonial I share with my husband, Colton. At least, I used to. Colton and I were married for 7 years. He worked in commercial sales, big deals, long hours, company lunches, handshakes, and bold suits. He had a charm about him. The kind of smile that made people trust him, even when they shouldn't have. Especially then. We were the couple people described as solid. We took weekend trips to Boone. He grilled steaks on Sundays. I bought scented candles from the local co-op. It was normal. Safe. Or so I thought. One Thursday night in October, gray, misty skies, a chill in the air that signaled the slow crawl into winter, I came home bone-tired. I'd spent the day running back-to-back onboarding sessions, and my voice felt like sandpaper. All I wanted was warmth and silence. I kicked off my heels, pulled my cardigan tighter around me, and reheated the shepherd's pie I'd made 2 nights before. Comfort food. Something grounding. Colton was out with his friends. Just grabbing drinks, he'd said before leaving in his slate gray blazer, the one I'd bought him last Christmas. It was routine. Once or twice a week, he met up with his coworkers to talk shop. I never questioned it. Sales culture was weird, and I'd learned long ago not to poke too hard. That night, I didn't even think twice. I ate in silence, lit a candle, and curled up on the couch. After brushing my teeth, I realized I'd left my phone downstairs. I walked down slowly, thinking about nothing in particular. But when I reached the living room, I stopped. Voices. Laughter. At first, I thought maybe Colton had come home early and had someone over. But then I realized the voices weren't in the room, they were coming from the ceiling speakers. He'd forgotten to disconnect his Bluetooth from our shared speaker system. I stood there, completely still, as the voices drifted through the air. Colton was laughing. His voice cut through the others, loud and clear. "I'll be our tally, dump her after the promotion. She's just my stepping stone. I mean, hell, she edited my resume." The words didn't make sense at first. It was like hearing a different language, one your brain refuses to translate. Then another voice joined in, someone I recognized vaguely from a previous Christmas party. "Damn, that's cold, man." Colton laughed again. "Yeah, she even networked me to her boss. Stupid, right? That VP role's mine after next quarter." Then, poof. I vanish. New apartment, new chick, new life. Everything inside me went silent. No thoughts. No anger. Just blankness. I remember placing my phone on the side table. My hands were shaking, but not from rage, more like a deep, cold disappointment that settled into my bones like winter. Without fully realizing it, I walked upstairs. Straight to my office. I unlocked the drawer where I kept important documents and pulled out the folder with Colton's resume. The one I had spent hours reworking for him, adding metrics, rewriting his achievements, tailoring it for the exact promotion he now bragged about. I opened Outlook, drafted a simple email to HR, attached his resume. And then I typed the note. A calm, factual summary of the audio I'd heard. I even included timestamps. Nothing emotional. Nothing messy. I hit send. And then I just sat there. I didn't cry that night. I didn't rage or break dishes. I just sat in my chair, staring at the books on the shelf, wondering when exactly I had stopped being his partner and started being his plan. I didn't confront him right away. I needed time to think. To watch. To see what else I had missed while playing the role of a supportive wife. And once I started paying attention, everything came into focus. His late nights were getting later. He'd started changing his clothes more often. There were unexplained receipts, coffee shops nowhere near his office, rideshare logs from parts of town we never visited. Little things. But they added up. I began taking notes. Quietly. I wrote everything down in a black journal I kept hidden in the bottom drawer of my nightstand. Not because I planned to use it, but because I needed proof, even just for myself, that I wasn't crazy. A week after the email, HR reached out. Whitney, someone I'd known for years, called me personally. She thanked me for the note, told me discreetly that they were reviewing Colton's internal activities and that some of the behavior I described matched with existing concerns. That was all she could say. But it was enough. I waited again. Colton didn't suspect a thing. He still kissed me on the cheek when he got home, still left his cologne in the hallway, still let me wash the lipstick stains off his collars, thinking I was too naive or too tired to notice. But I noticed everything now. 2 weeks later, he came home angry. Not the loud, dramatic anger. The kind that simmered just under the surface. "Someone's trying to screw me over at work," he muttered as he dropped his keys on the kitchen counter. I said nothing. Apparently there's some conflict of interest investigation. It's total bullsh*t. I sipped my tea. "You didn't hear anything about that, did you?" I looked at him. Really looked at him. And for the first time in a long time, I saw through the surface. The polished smile. The expensive suit. The man who once told me I was his anchor. It had all been performance. "No," I said, and walked away. He watched me go, confused. But he didn't follow. There's more to tell. About what happened when the investigation dug deeper. About what came out. Not just the manipulation, but the lies, the clients he poached, the woman he'd been seeing in Hendersonville. About how he lost the promotion. How he lost his job. And how I lost him, and somehow gained myself in the process. But that's still coming. And trust me, it gets worse before it gets better. The days that followed blurred together in the way that time does when you're waiting for a storm to hit. Colton began coming home more irritable, pacing the hallway on long phone calls, sighing dramatically, and spending hours at his laptop in the dining room. I never asked questions. I didn't have to. I already knew where this train was headed. He started sleeping in later, skipping the gym, muting his phone, even when it buzzed incessantly. I watched quietly as the confident man I married began to wilt under pressure he didn't understand, because he still didn't know I was the one who'd lit the match. One evening, while he was in the shower, his phone buzzed and lit up with a preview from someone saved as B. A single sentence flashed across the screen. "Can't wait to finally wake up next to you." I stood there in the hallway, barefoot, holding a laundry basket filled with freshly folded towels. I didn't move. Didn't flinch. Just stared at those words until the screen dimmed again. That was when something inside me broke, not from sadness, but from clarity. This wasn't just about betrayal. It wasn't just about losing someone. It was about seeing the truth, finally, in its full, unforgiving form. The man I had been cooking for, cheering on, and cleaning up after had never really been a partner. He had been a parasite. And I had fed him with my trust. I walked into the bedroom, placed the towels down, and opened the drawer where I kept the black journal. I added a new entry. The timestamp. The message. I didn't cry that night either. A few days later, Whitney from HR called again. She spoke more carefully this time. "Irina, we've had to escalate some things. I wanted to let you know, unofficially, that your email led us to open several internal audits." I felt the weight in her voice. Whatever they'd found, it wasn't just unethical, it was serious. "You're not in trouble," she added quickly, as if she could hear the silence on my end. "We're not disclosing your name. But I just thought you deserved to know." I thanked her and hung up. Colton came home 2 hours later, threw his keys harder than usual onto the kitchen counter, and opened a beer before saying a word. I stood at the sink, washing a pot that didn't need washing, and waited. "They're suspending my accounts. IT says it's protocol while they do a review." Bullsh*t. He was pacing now, bottle clutched tightly in his hand. "And now some prick from legal is asking for my client pipeline. Says something's off with the commissions from Q2. I don't get it, I've done nothing wrong." That was the moment. The moment I wanted to turn around and say, "Actually, Colton, you've done a lot wrong." I wanted to yell, to list every offense, every lie, every manipulative little tactic he thought I'd never catch. But I didn't, because I wasn't done gathering. The next morning, I woke up before him. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen island with my laptop. I had a spreadsheet open, filled with notes. Times he was away. Expenses charged. Client names. Messages. Emails I'd skimmed when he forgot to log out. I was building a timeline not to destroy him, but to defend myself. To document everything. Because I knew divorce was coming. And I knew he wouldn't go quietly. It was then that I remembered a conversation from months ago. He had casually mentioned that one of his coworkers, Margot, not the same as the woman texting, was annoying him by asking too many questions about client overlap. He had laughed it off at the time, told me she was just jealous he was rising faster. I found her on LinkedIn. Messaged her something simple. Hi Margot, you don't know me well, but I'm Colton's wife. If you're willing to talk privately, I may have some information that overlaps with concerns you had a few months ago. She replied within 10 minutes. We arranged a call. It lasted 2 hours. And what she told me changed everything. Apparently, Colton had been inflating his sales figures for nearly a year. He was double-dipping into 2 different markets by manipulating report dates and altering the origination of leads. It was subtle, sophisticated, something only someone with access to internal processes, someone like me, could even notice. It hit me like a blow to the gut. I had helped him do it. Without knowing. The spreadsheets. The quarterly recaps. The client data he had asked me to proofread before his big presentations. I thought I was supporting my husband, but I was helping him cheat his way up the ladder. I spent the next several days printing everything. Notes, messages, financial inconsistencies. I saved backup copies on a flash drive in cloud storage and emailed them to myself under a pseudonym. I wasn't just preparing for a divorce anymore. I was preparing for war. By the second week of November, Colton's demeanor shifted. He became defensive. Edgy. He snapped at small things, forgotten grocery items, an empty paper towel roll, the fact that the car hadn't been washed. One night, after a particularly tense silence over dinner, he said something I'll never forget. You've been quiet lately. You're not scheming, are you? He said it half joking, but there was something behind his eyes. Suspicion. Maybe even fear. And that's when I realized he was losing control. I met his eyes. Let this silence stretch. No, I said. But in my mind, I whispered, I'm reclaiming it. There was still more to do. I hadn't filed for divorce yet, but I'd chosen my attorney, Shelby Ng, a former litigator turned family law specialist who came highly recommended by a former coworker. We met for coffee at a little place off Marymount Avenue. I told her everything. Every sentence felt like opening a locked drawer inside myself. The lies, the manipulation, the emotional exhaustion, the betrayal, the details of what I had done in return. When I was finished, she sat back, stirred her coffee, and nodded once. Good, she said calmly. We'll go after everything. And we'll do it quietly. There was something in the way she said it. Like I had finally handed the wheel to someone who knew exactly where we were headed and how to make the crash as painless as possible. But that was still ahead. Back at home, Colton was cracking. His smile had disappeared. His schedule changed daily. I caught him checking my phone when he thought I wasn't looking. He moved things around in the house. Started asking strange questions. And then, one night, he came home drunk. Not tipsy, drunk. Slurred speech. Wobbly steps. The smell of gin clinging to his skin like sweat. He collapsed onto the couch and started muttering. I should have done it sooner. Shouldn't have waited. Should have just. He trailed off. Then looked at me through glassy, bloodshot eyes. You know it's not personal, right? I stared at him. You were always the safe option. The backup plan. And then he passed out. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the armchair across from the couch, watching him snore softly in his crumpled suit. And I made a promise to myself. Next time he walked out that door, he wouldn't be walking back in. A week passed after that night on the couch. Colton seemed to think it had never happened. He was back to pacing the hall with a phone pressed to his ear, back to making coffee without offering me a cup, back to checking his reflection more than his bank statements. But I saw it, the subtle unraveling. His clothes were wrinkled more often. He started misplacing things, his wallet, his charger, once even his laptop. He snapped at the dog for barking when a package came, and then tried to play it off like he was just tired. Meanwhile, I kept moving. Every day, I did one small thing to prepare. Quietly. Intentionally. A copy of the mortgage statement sent to my personal email. A shared account reviewed. A password changed. I had already opened a box under my maiden name. Started sending a few bills there. I even switched banks, slowly transferring small amounts so they wouldn't set off any alarms. But the hardest part wasn't the logistics. It was the silence. Pretending. Making eggs in the morning and nodding when he grunted hello. Folding his shirts when I knew he was sending flirty messages to someone named Celine in Greenville. Smiling when he complained about company politics, as if he wasn't on the verge of being exposed. Some nights I would stare at the ceiling, wondering how I had arrived here. How man I once trusted to know my fears and dreams was now someone I couldn't stand to hear breathe next to me. But I didn't break. Because I wasn't done yet. Then came the email. A formal one from HR. Not to me, of course not, but to Colton. He left his laptop open on the kitchen table while he stepped outside to take a call, and I glanced over and saw the subject line, urgent. HR compliance inquiry follow-up, it was marked high priority. A red exclamation point. My heart didn't race. I didn't feel the need to gasp or sit down. I just took a deep breath. It was happening. He returned 10 minutes later, oblivious, already typing out a reply, muttering something under his breath about idiots in the compliance department. I watched him compose lies in real time, each keystroke building the narrative he'd convinced himself was still working. That evening, he poured himself a bourbon and asked if I wanted to go to Charleston for the weekend. Charleston. The place we'd gone on our honeymoon. The place he said we'd retire to someday. He offered it up like a band-aid, as if a weekend trip could erase everything festering beneath the surface. I told him I had too much work. He nodded, looked away, and muttered something I didn't quite catch. I didn't ask him to repeat it. The next day, I scheduled my final appointment with Shelby, my attorney. We met in her office this time. Tidy. Quiet. She wore a dark green blazer, simple jewelry, hair pulled back so tight you could see the tension it hid. I handed her the flash drive. Everything's on there, I said. She looked me in the eye for a moment before nodding. We'll file quietly, she said. Once it's submitted, he'll be served within a week. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just nodded. On the way out of the building, I sat in my car and stared at the steering wheel for 10 full minutes. It was really happening. I wasn't scared. But I was grieving in a strange way. Grieving the version of me who once believed this man could be my future. Grieving the woman who worked late nights reformatting his resume, who bought him dress shoes when he got promoted, who made excuses for the empty look he gave me during family holidays. She deserved better. So I was going to give her that. Back home, Colton was in the garage, pacing again. I could hear his voice through the side door. No, I didn't tell her yet. Jesus, what do you think I'm trying to do? It's not that simple. I paused. Of course I'll be out before the end of the month. I just need her to sign the damn refinance and no, she doesn't suspect anything. He laughed. She still thinks we're going to Charleston. I stood there for a full minute. The air around me felt thick. My ears buzzed. He was planning to leave. Not just leave, use me, again, to wrap up whatever loose ends he needed. Financial ones, probably. Or legal. And then vanish. It should have crushed me. But it didn't. I walked upstairs. Showered. Got into bed early. And slept soundly. Over the next few days, I made sure to be the version of myself he expected. Quiet. Cooperative. A little distant, maybe, but nothing that would suggest what was really coming. He left me alone most of the time. Started packing away things from the garage. A few shirts disappeared from the closet. Some of his ties. I pretended not to notice. When he asked if I could sign a form from the mortgage broker just to update the file, I told him I'd look at it later. That night, I emailed it to Shelby. She called me the next morning. It's a quitclaim, she said flatly. He's trying to transfer the deed to you so he can walk away clean, but you'd be stuck with the mortgage. I stared at the screen for a long time. He was planning to leave me with the house. The debt. The mess. The life we built burdened entirely on my shoulders. I thanked her and hung up. And I waited. By then, I had stopped cooking for him. I stopped pretending. I wasn't cold, but I was done playing house. We lived like polite strangers. He was too distracted with whatever plans he was making to push the issue. And then, one night, while I was watching an old episode of Columbo with a glass of wine, the doorbell rang. Colton was upstairs. I opened the door and found a man in a blazer standing there with a thin envelope. Irina Green? Yes, you've been served. I closed the door slowly. Walked upstairs. Colton was shaving, the bathroom sink covered in flecks of foam and stubble. He looked at me in the mirror. You okay? He asked. I smiled faintly. Yeah, I said. Just fine. Colton didn't ask what was in the envelope. He assumed it was something from work, more HR noise, probably. His arrogance had always been his blind spot. He didn't consider, even for a moment, that I'd be the one to take the first step. The next morning, he left early, not bothering to say goodbye. I packed his remaining things into 3 large boxes and labeled them clearly closet, desk, garage. I didn't throw anything away. I didn't destroy or damage. I just packed neatly, like someone ready to clean out more than just space. Shelby filed the divorce papers and the supporting documentation that same day. Within a week, the reaction from his employer reached full force. Colton came home like a tornado, door slammed, footsteps thundered through the house, hands running over his face like he was trying to scrub the reality off his skin. They fired me, he muttered. I kept my eyes on the book I was reading. Oh! For violating ethics policies, he added. Something about falsified numbers and client overlaps. What the hell does that even mean? I didn't do anything other people aren't doing. I didn't respond. He ranted for another 20 minutes. Something about unfair treatment, no proof, and idiots with spreadsheets. But he had no idea I was the spreadsheet. The divorce proceedings didn't drag. I had receipts. Literally. Detailed records, a clear timeline, and witness corroboration thanks to Margot's written statement. He tried to negotiate. At first, he wanted to split everything 50-50ths. Then, when he realized how deep the evidence went, he offered to walk away from the house if I agreed to let him keep the car and what was left of our joint savings. Shelby leaned forward during mediation and said, without blinking, no, we got the house. We got the savings. We kept the pension contributions, too. Colton walked away with the car, barely paid off, and a suitcase full of tailored suits with no job to wear them to. His severance was withheld pending legal investigation. By the time he signed the last page, he was pale and hollow-eyed, like someone who had finally realized the game was over. He looked at me across the table. You planned this, he said. I didn't blink. I responded. After the divorce was finalized, Colton moved out. Left no note. No goodbye. Just his keys in a cheap plastic bowl on the kitchen counter. I stared at them for a while before dropping them into a drawer and locking it shut. The house was quieter. Not emptier, just quieter. I replaced the sheets. Repainted the guest bathroom. Donated half of his dishes and sold the espresso machine he never used but insisted on buying because it completed the image. It was never about the espresso. I ran into him 3 months later. I was at the DMV, of all places, getting my license renewed. He looked tired. Thinner. The swagger was gone, replaced with something distant. We made eye contact. He gave a weak smile. Hey, he said. Hey. He looked down at his phone, then back at me. I heard you. Did well. With the settlement. I nodded. I had a good lawyer. Right. He paused. You're really different. I tilted my head slightly. No. I'm just not covering for you anymore. He nodded like he understood. But I could tell he didn't. Not really. I walked away. It's been a year now. I sold the house a few months ago, not out of spite, but because it never really felt like mine. It felt like the place where I learned something hard and necessary. Like a classroom you eventually graduate from. I bought a smaller home closer to the mountains. Quiet, sun-soaked, full of fresh air and old trees. I got a dog. Named her Frankie. She's stubborn and smart and refuses to be rushed, something I admire deeply. I still work in training, but I freelance now. Smaller companies, better hours. More writing, more people with soul. I take long walks. Make slow dinners. Talk to my sisters more. I'm even seeing someone, though we're taking things slow. He's kind. Unimpressed by flesh. Asks real questions and listens to the answers. I don't talk about Colton much. He became a chapter, not the whole book. But every so often, I think back to the night I overheard him call me a stepping stone. And I smile, because he thought he was using me to climb. But in the end, I was the one who stepped forward. And he stayed exactly where he was, waiting for someone else to do the work.